Hello, everyone, and welcome to Van Vehicles Skyscraper 2020. My name is Jason Pritchard, and I'm the editor of eVTOLinsights.com. And I'm really happy to have been given this opportunity to be part of this virtual summit, which focuses on the implementation of urban air mobility in Latin America. In this video, I'll be speaking to Chuck Clauser, Senior Director of Architecture of PS&S, and who also leads the company's Urban Air Mobility Task Force. Chuck was part of two Van Vehicles think tank conversations about vertiports, and I'll be talking to him about PS&S's work in Latin America and get his insight into the implementation of urban air mobility in the region. So Chuck, really nice to talk to you.
Same here, Jason. Thanks for the opportunity. It's terrific to be aboard and to speak with you today.
Great, thanks, Chuck. Could I just start off really by really enjoyed your presentation that you've done in Skyscraper, which is available to listen to. You mentioned that you want to learn as much as possible about this industry. How valuable has your partnership been with Van Vehicles as you try to understand what the main challenges are when implementing urban air mobility in Latin America?
Yes, well, we've been studying urban air mobility pretty deeply for the past 18 months, 24 months, something like that, inside the company, inside our task force. And I think we've learned a lot relatively, still looking to learn a lot more. But the statement that I kind of hang on to is that I want to know everything. You know, we want to know everything. And what I mean by that is that there are so many components and elements to the ecosystem of urban air mobility, advanced air mobility, and everything that it touches and depends upon is something that is very important to architects and engineers, the A&E community, if you will, because that's the way we go about our work, is by finding out as much as we can about the functional operations and all the requirements of any individual organization. Just to tell you real quickly why I think that's so very important, particularly now, since we're all learning as we go. And we're all beginning to see things that are starting to solidify and those things that are still out there drifting a little bit, right? But prior to our urban air involvement, I had been involved for 30 years in healthcare design. And as part of that, it's probably one of the more complex, entities that are out there, because even though there's one umbrella organization called the hospital, it's comprised of numerous different departments that are materially very different in what they do and how they staff and what their equipment are and all the requirements and all that. So there's a great deep understanding that has to take place in order to do a good job of solving whatever the design, initiative is for that. So I tell you that only because it's kind of the way our mind works. So that's why we want to know as much about, the community coming in as possible. Not so much the aerodynamics or the control systems or those kinds of things, but we absolutely need to know everything else about, that's associated with the land, with the airspace, with the actual operations. They're going to come from the fleet operator, as well as if there's going to be an FBO, and certainly, the ride operator. So there are a number of pieces just to get two vertiports up and running. So I think you asked about our relationship with Van Vehicles, and I think it's been a stellar one, tell you the truth, because Felipe and his group have done a remarkable job, in my opinion, of delving pretty deeply into a country that they know very, very, very well, and understand the land, the topography, the culture, the government, the citizenry, the transportation, the commerce, the economics, and everything that makes up, that portion of Northern Latin America. And we've been looking at that since we've become involved with Van Vehicles, to get to know, all those elements well ourselves. So that has been very, very enlightening, and it kind of tempers the way that we would approach terminal design or facility design, or vertiport design in Colombia, because of the differences that exist that are materially different, it's a human condition. So it's the same around the world in many, many respects. Everywhere, people are people, and they want to get on with their lives. And we're all in a 21st century paradigm, and this is a changing paradigm, is it not? So we're looking to pull together all of the elements that make sense from a humanistic standpoint, as well as a developmental standpoint, and address all of the nuances really that are coming about from this thing that we call urban air mobility. So a great deal of research has already been started. Maybe we're going to talk more about what the Veron has done in building their vision for how urban air would work. And I would certainly welcome that. But it's been a delight because they have done so much work up front, and they've talked to the government, and they've talked to the commerce, and they understand the transportation networks, and where the stress points are, and where the difficulties are, and where the opportunities are too. So it's to me it's a wonderful and easy working relationship because of their contributions already.
Thanks for that, Chuck. And I completely agree with your points and what you made with van vehicles. I think they're really instrumental in helping people be a bit more educated and learn a bit more about the Latin America region as well. It goes on to my next question, really. So in terms of all the things that you've learned so far with the think tanks, is there anything in particular that you've learned about Latin America as a region that perhaps you wouldn't have known before in comparison to, for example, the USA, which is completely different demographics?
Completely different demographics. I was going to say, the first thing that comes to mind is the greatly varying terrain in the country, how the cities are arrayed, throughout the country, and where the divisions are as you march from the Pacific West Coast, inland and over the mountains. That's one thing, but similar things exist in the United States simply because of its size and the different areas throughout the country going east to west. So there's certainly that, and I think an understanding of that is part and parcel to that. The other thing that comes to mind right away is I think the airspace is different. I think the regulatory framework is different, and not so different that it means any less, impact on safety or all the aviation regulations that really are needed in an enterprise like this. But it is different. And if you go on, Veron's website, you'll see illustrations of how they envision the airspace working with corridors, compartmented corridors going to their vertiport and intersection management areas, the VMAs, which are the knuckles for how the interface happens between the vertiport and the route, to the next vertiport or vertiports. So I think that was very well thought out, and we welcome conversation in that as well. But those kinds of things become very, very fundamental into how we begin to conjure how these vertiports really should be functioning. Not yet what they look like. I think that evolves. There's an awful lot yet to do. And after all, let's keep in mind there really are no operational vertiports right now in existence flying eVTOLs. Okay, there's a lot of concepts out there. There's a lot of very wonderful ideas that are floating around. There are some that are less so, and I think that reality is going to play a very, very big part. Reality comes with its own, number of coats to wear, if you will, and financing is going to be a big part of that, and the budget is going to be a big part of that. So that comes to mind very well, very closely. The fact that it's a Pacific, there's an awful lot of coastal area. The entire western side of Colombia is, or most of it is along the Pacific coast. So I think that whatever that offers for existing commerce and potential for tying in with what the coast offers and what the interior waterways offer is very important and significant. And the other thing too is, I don't know if I mentioned this yet or not, but just looking at Cartagena, for example, the distance from its northernmost point of the city, if you look at Google Earth, all the way down to its southern extremities, about 19 miles. And and Felipe can correct us if we're wrong on that. But what that means is if the eVTOL is traveling 120 miles an hour, it's 2 miles a minute. That's a 10-minute ride. So the flights tend to be shorter initially if we're staying within the urban environment. If we're going outboard to the other towns and communities, beyond the city, it's a different story. Now you're talking about range and power availability. But so I think the opportunity to have short flights at relatively low altitudes in defined corridors with the blessing of government, with the input and the encouragement of its citizenry and its local zoning, the real estate folks, the energy suppliers. As all of that comes together, we're looking at probably a lesser energy demand and output to accomplish an intercity routing. So that was kind of interesting to see as well. And while I'm also looking at this, and you asked me about, what have we learned from looking at the country and the environment is it's changing topography. From the lowlands to the mid areas. I think I don't want to. I know that there's a couple of 3,000 meter cities there. There's certainly the foothills and the Andes, to contend with, and then there are also the forests and the plains and the great expanses. And I was thinking beyond just the rural answer to public transportation and the service industry of aerial transportation. It could be a very exciting development to be working in the mountains, with a different kind of business plan, and maybe it would be a search and rescue. I don't know. Maybe it would be that kind of thing, and longer distance also, plays into this because everybody has their eye on a reasonable start. That reasonable start is a 4-passenger piloted airplane of limited range and a certain speed, using battery technology, which is changing monthly, it seems. And so that, and with varying requirements too. I just heard a piece by Simon Perrier from Jaunt that said when they're looking at the power requirements for their aircraft, there are so many energy dependent items and elements just within that, many of which are competing with each other. So there's an awful lot to resolve just with that. But pulling all that together with a further goal, downrange of larger aircraft that's carrying more people or more freight and cargo, or a greater combination of that, together with a greater range and maybe height and climbing capability, more weather capability, is very, very interesting. And so I think that the potential is kind of exponential in a way, as far as the eye can see anyway, that there's a lot of potential. And Columbia kind of sums it up. It sums up that you have everything from the coastal, sea level areas up into the mountain ranges and out into the forest. So that was very, very interesting, and just gets the mind rolling as to what might be possible just there alone. Yeah, so let me stop there.
No, that you make some brilliant points, Chuck. And I think the possibility to potentially have vertiports, as you say, in the rural as well as the urban as well, because at the end of the day, urban air mobility, yes, it will connect cities, people between cities, but also, as you rightly said, the opportunity to open up search and rescue and sort of emergency services, which is a conversation that many people are having at the moment, aren't they? So to offer that opportunity for Columbia, and as you said, with the topography, it is really, really exciting. Leads me on to my next point then, really, with vertiport designs themselves. So we're not necessarily going to see a one-size-fits-all vertiport design, are we? Because different cities have different needs, different sizes as well. And as you mentioned too, we're going to might have some vertiports that are in, as you say, the rural areas too. So do you think we'll see similar vertiport designs in Latin America as opposed to the rest of the world, or is it sort of like a one-size-fits-all? Just keen to get your thoughts on that, really.
I hope it's not one size fits all. I don't think that that's really possible because of the variable nature of what we're trying to develop here. And I'm glad you asked that question. We need to talk about that. The vertiports, I think, that we see as a hub, let's say, ideally would be married in some way, either physically and directly to a transportation center, or ideally nearby, and as well as choosing the best aerial routes that will consume airspace or be involved in the airspace, and whatever the regulatory structure is for that, but also its effect of those flight paths over the ground. So a selection of that is very, very important. All of that ties into where are the ideal locations, and it's not one or two, checkoff items we're looking for. There's a host of things that are terribly important. So that's number one. And the design of any building, really, and certainly these vertiports is what we're thinking of. Please think of this as an airport that's on a single spot on the earth. I mean, it's a condensed aviation environment where the comings and goings are very, very similar in concept to how airports work. We don't have runways, we don't have large airplanes, and we don't have large volumes of people that are moving. But we do have this element of commerce, modest as it is, and it's going to be a modest start as well. And let's say it starts with two vertiports. You have a hub and you have a destination airport, a vertiport. Well, the hub airport, if it's tied to a transportation center, may have a certain character to it. The destination airport may also indeed be tied to nearby transportation. Ideally, I think it should. There's got to be a solution to this where wherever our vertiports are, we're not increasing the ground traffic of existing, vehicles, buses and taxis and that kind of thing. So there's that component, and as more come online, they all have to respect the location itself. The topography is going to be different. Its neighborhood is going to be different. The real estate around it is going to be different. The way people move within their city is different. Maybe there's, so there's a lot of variables that play into how this works. Now, there's also a lot of talk and consideration and ideas about modular design. And we're all for it. I think that there's a lot of really, really good potential characteristics that come from the ideas behind modular design. And like many other things, they have pros and cons. And the pros are very strong with repetitive construction, design and technique, and you get a branding appearance and all of that, where maybe you can do, plug and play here and there. But I think there are ways to accomplish the branding and those kinds of things that are unique to this particular enterprise that we're starting, where the commonality is there, and yet you're looking at different buildings, because the building design and its appearance and its structure and the way that it's organized responds to the environment that it's in. So there's those things as well. The other thing we have to consider is, now these are short distances. We talked about the 19-mile range and the 10-minute flight, but looking beyond that, where we do have flights that are of a greater duration, then we have to consider unplanned events. So for 10 minutes, your midpoint is 5 minutes, and within 5 minutes, if you have a difficulty, that's a pretty easy, problem to solve in getting back on the ground to a vertiport primarily, to a regional airport, let's say, that might be more nearby, secondarily, and thirdly, to some other pre-planned location that makes a good emergency landing spot. So all of that, I think, can be planned in. Where you have greater distances, and I think we need to think about, well, what's an interim facility going to look like? It doesn't need to be a vertiport, but it needs to be something that I think will intercept the emergency, whatever it is, whether it's a vehicle emergency, whether it's a passenger event, or if it's an airspace delay, or whatever it is, there's a whole host of reasons, really. So all of that needs to be part of the network, I think. Let's also make sure that we're thinking about the fleet operator. Now, these are the people, this is the, let's call it the Part 135 operator, who's going to own a fleet of aircraft. And maybe there's one fleet operator operating 3 lines of aircraft. And this is going to tie in, I think, to how we discuss, if you get into this, Jason, how these things should be arrayed. But if you take varying different airports, and just picking off the top of my head, Joby's design, Jaunt's design, and let's say Lilium's design, those 3 are all dramatically different in the way that they address this issue of vertical flight. So their requirements are going to be different. We want to know about all those different requirements so that we understand what happens at the vertiport coming and going. Very, very important how that all ties in. Those fleet operators, singly or triply, are going to need an MRO location, somewhere for their evening maintenance and their software updates and cleaning and all that other kind of stuff on a daily and periodic basis, as well as training. Training has to happen for both the flight crew and for the ground crew, for the maintainers, and also for the FBO staff that's going to assist, with arrivals and departures. So all of that is really a very active enterprise, that's just bubbling with activity and their own sets of requirements. And if we think of these as all the different departments of the hospital, then you're right, you're on the right track. These are the thinking points that I think that we have to have in mind. We have to be very, very broad in our thinking in helping to give birth to a system like this, an ecosystem, because it touches so many varying points, some of which don't even seem connected, and yet in many ways they are, because they all inform how our ecosystem, our little ecosystem here, is going to work and be successful. And that success doesn't start with, let's get it running and see how people like it. I mean, I think that's absolutely the wrong idea. I'm no advertising person or guru with that at all. But it just seems to me that we've got to prepare our populace for what's coming. And I think that there are intelligent ways to do that. And no sleight of hand, nothing like that, from an advertising standpoint. But the truth of the matter, this is what's coming. This is what we can expect. Here it is. There's no surprises. This is in your future. It's coming. The government regulators, same thing. They've got to understand from a somewhat different standpoint what the values are to the city, how it's going to improve their transportation and perhaps their commerce and the way people move and live, and have a paradigm, that really is electric and very forward moving, and yet doing all the things that it purports to do. Provide, a little bit cleaner air and a little bit more time savings and a little bit more efficiency and a little more, human services, viewpoint, because it touches a lot of things. So looking at all of that, I think that how that works may be materially different, in Latin America and in Colombia, which is our focus right now, right? Opposed to perhaps how other vertiports may be developing, but the elements are the same. The ideas on what makes the construct of an enterprise like this, of an ecosystem like this, viable and workable and acceptable and approvable and sustainable.
Completely agree, Chuck, and you made some really, really good points as well in the fact that we need to make sure that the ecosystem all comes together at the same time. We don't have things that are coming in a bit later or a bit earlier than others as well. And also you touched very nicely upon a very critical point of that ecosystem, and that's public acceptance, isn't it? It's where there might be some people that may be a bit worried, a bit concerned as to what these eVTOL aircraft will look like, whether it's going to be over their neighborhoods and over their sort of homes. But it's all really important that we all work together to get to that goal as well. So some really, really good points there as well. It kind of leads me on again to my another question, Chuck. Are you able to tell us a bit more then about how PSNS will be involved in that implementation in urban air mobility in Latin America? Do you have any initial objectives or a planned timeline, for example?
Well, sure. I think that, first of all, the value, I think, of a company like PSNS lies within the disciplines that we have throughout the company. We're architects. We have a host of engineering services like civil, structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection. Our environmental group, water services, public services, all that kind of thing. It really can look at a problem and bring a lot of forces and talent to bear on solving a building construction or an energy project. So I think there's that, and the entire company is becoming more and more aware of the potential of urban air mobility and advanced air mobility, what it means, and what their responsibilities are going to be. So that's very exciting just from that standpoint alone. As far as Latin America is concerned, I think it's very difficult to design from afar. I think that the designers need to experience the locale. I think you need to visit the city. I think you got to walk it and experience it and look at it and talk to the people and visit around and use the transportation and check at the sites and begin to pick up the flavor of what the culture is expressing. I mean, every culture expresses something, whether it's in time or whether it's unique to their environment. So we need to know that, because frankly, we want to express that in our buildings. We don't want to do cookie cutters. We don't want to do, C-box conversions or those kinds of things. But at the same time, we understand the impact of budget and what that means. And so you got to deliver a package that pulls together all of these things, and it's got to be affordable. And that's the only way it's going to come into being. So this is not a government enterprise where, we have a lot of overruns. That doesn't work. What works is it's a lot of focus and a lot of time spent on analyzing what the requirements are. So PSNS is pretty good at that, and I think that the experience in the public sector and in the private sector too can be brought to bear to help solve the numerous problems that are out there that we want to inform ourselves on and solve for the community and for the enterprise. So I think a visit is appropriate. I think an understanding of the culture is entirely appropriate. That needs to be expressed, as I already mentioned, and it's a very exciting time. Everything that we've learned and everything and by the way, we can all agree that the staying pace with urban air is like drinking from a fire hose, right? I mean, that's pretty much the way the information is coming, and that's a great thing, because it all, the rising tide raises all boats. So we're all kind of sharing with the information that is being generated globally on a global standpoint. I mean, it's the easiest thing in the world to connect with a conference and you have people from all over expressing their views. And guess what? A lot of the views are just so very, very similar because the requirements are similar. This is not a Wild West environment where, geez, anything's going to go. I mean, the potential is great. We can do whatever we want. No. This is going to be contained and in a regulatory framework that is going to address all of the good things that urban air purports to be from 5, 10, 15 years ago, maybe even further back in time. So for us, it's a very exciting engagement and potential. And we're happy to be aboard with looking at that.
Brilliant. And I can imagine, hopefully, when COVID-19 gets to a stage where we can safely travel, I think it's absolutely paramount and important to get into the cities, as you say, like Bogota, like Cartagena, like Medellin, for example. But what challenges do you think that cities in Latin America could bring up then when trying to build these vertiports? Bearing in mind the region is one of the world's most urbanized, for example.
Certainly urbanized, and again, just looking at Google Earth, which is best we could do right now, the density is pretty amazing. And you look at the ribbons of traffic, from some of those photographs, and yeah, it looks like LA or New York City or Paris, places like that around the globe. So the density is certainly there, and that immediately, raises some red flags on what our potentials may or may not be, what our opportunities might deliver, and what the challenges are. Certainly, density is one of them. A very broad residential area is something of concern. You talked about public acceptance. I don't think that we want to be a thorn under anyone's saddle. I think it all has to be worked out very, very well. I would like to know more about what the leadership of the municipalities and the cities feel about this. And I think that would go a long way into helping to solve how to introduce an ecosystem like this into the community. It ties into so many different things. So there's that challenge. I think that we can handle easily the topography, because we're not talking about hundreds of miles of distance in flight right now that's crossing, forests and expanses of mountain ranges and terrain elevations, that kind of thing. The other thing that it really isn't a challenge, it's a blessing, is a terrific weather, and the very, very temperate weather conditions there. I'd like to know more about weather there, but it's rather consistent, and it looks beautiful. So that I think is very, very important. And by the way, that would also play into how the designs of our vertiports begin to appear and function, because abundant bright sunlight brings both the great benefits of sunshine, and also the elements of shade and shadow. So all that kind of plays in to that. So I think that my sense is that the challenges are going to be those of regulation, both from the CAA standpoint and from the city regulatory standpoint. And the voices of commerce have got to be heard, the voices of transportation, the voices of the citizenry, and by the way, real estate and energy are things that I would like to know more about as well. What is the energy capability for delivering, high energy? What are the plans for that? I think we need some more conversations in that regard as well. So, is all of this solvable? Absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind. I think that we as a globe, all right, have been looking at this now for a number of years and exposing where the problem areas are, where the opportunities certainly are, and that's great. I talked about this before. You got to look into the light and bright areas of an ecosystem like this, but you also got to probe into the darker areas. We talked about shadow, and let's look at what can be potential for some difficulty that has to be addressed and overcome. You don't want to get to a situation where we said, well, we really didn't give that too much thought. Well, there's no room for that, in this burgeoning enterprise, for any of us, regardless of the community that you come from. It all has to be looked at, and it all has to be addressed, so that we come to the best solution that's possible for the area and the budget and all of the potential that may exist in an area, whether it's 2 vertiports or whether it's 22 vertiports in an area. So we got to look to now. We got to look to making it successful. We got to look to the future. Yes, but problems exist, on a global scale for sure. Opportunities exist, and I think there is more of the difference. I think there's more opportunity to highlight, frankly, than there are disagreeable elements to have to work with. And I think it can all be managed by how working together. That's probably the best idea that's been brought up. Let's work together and get these items solved. And folks are.
Completely agree, Chuck, as well. And the phrase I'm hearing quite a lot from our many webinars that I've been on because of COVID is it's collaboration. It's not competition. We're all working towards the same goal. Yes, there'll be companies that want to get first to market, but we want to make sure that what we're bringing to market is not only safe, it's gone through all the regulatory framework, and it's got that acceptance from the public as well. So that they're really, really important things. So really, really brilliant insight. So I really appreciate all your efforts on that one as well. Just leads me into my final question, really, Chuck. Is there anything else you feel like we've not mentioned about Veyron Vehicles, their think tanks, anything about urban air mobility in Latin America that you think would be good to add as a final conclusion?
Absolutely, Jason. I think that these think tanks have been somewhat remarkable. And for those who have looked at them and watched them and listened to the variety of speakers that are out there, and I think the Veyron organization has tried very hard to pull together all of the voices that are appropriate to the various elements of this whole ecosystem. So if you've seen it, then you've benefited from it. And we've all made our notes and I think are better off for just that, for just what Veyron has done, together with everything else, all the other webinars have been out there from NASA and from the FAA, from industry, from Vertical Flight Society, and all of this is just an unprecedented volume of information and knowledge that's available. It's available to us. We don't have to go very far to start to get the kind of information. And eVTOL Insights is another one. You could spend a wonderful morning listening to some of those podcast interviews. They're great. The questions are Jason, they're insightful. There's a lot of good probing that you've done with the people that have been working with you, and the information that came out of that is good. So the wealth of information is there. If you haven't looked at these think tanks, you haven't watched them and listened to them, watch them and listen to them, because they're really, really good. Look at the Veyron website and look at what they're thinking about in terms of how this ecosystem is working, how they envision their hub and network coming about, and their low altitude and relatively short range enterprises, and all of the potential that exists with the distribution of commerce and transportation, waterborne, groundborne, and now airborne. And let's not forget two other, maybe things that we should be thinking about. One is standards. I think standards are coming about, not just FAA standards, not just and NASA standards and that kind of airspace things, but standards for maybe aircraft design and familiarity, so that we've got to train an entire legion of air crew and ground crew. And I don't think that everybody should be off doing their own thing. So standards need to be applied. We're looking at what's coming out of NFPA, for example, and all of that needs to be watched very carefully. So standards are important. And the other thing that is important as well, besides standards, is and I've lost my thought on that, Jason. It may come back to me, it may not. But it's a wonderful time to be at the threshold of this and learn from it and contribute to it. And I think that all of us can do yeoman's work with that. So it's very exciting. I appreciate the time that you've given us as well. So thanks.
My pleasure, Chuck, and thank you very much for your kind words about eVTOL Insights. For those that are watching this video as well, don't forget there is a huge amount of content available from a host of other companies, including PS&S, on the Skyscraper website, on the Skyscraper section, of Varen Vehicles, and that's www.varenvehicles.com/skyscraper. So, Chuck, great talking to you as always. We'd love to keep the conversations going. Keep up the good work. Thank you.
Jason, thanks so much. It was a pleasure as well.